Want more positivity in your life? Subscribe, turn on notifications, follow us, and all that techie stuff. We'd love to hear from you. Comment, share, or give us a thumbs up. We are grateful to have you hanging out with us at Matt Logan Speaks.
Henry Ford said, if there is any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. I saw that this morning and I thought, politics, that's on everybody's mind right now. And Nels Pierson III is with me today. And I've never watched and looked at politics very much, but I obviously reached out to you, and we've had some discussions of all the other people I've reached out to as well. But nobody wants to sit down and have a conversation to figure out the other person's point of view. What do you say to that quote from?
Well, I think it ends up being the most important thing. At the end of the day, one of the reasons I feel I end up being a strong candidate is I do take the time to listen to people. In fact, during the most recent debate that I had forum with my opponent, I put that out there, and I have always pressed that as kind of a personal challenge of mine that even if someone is literally campaigning against me, if they offer to just sit down and have coffee, maybe even have a beer, I'm happy to go ahead and do that and just have that conversation. And I go into it a lot of times knowing I'm not going to change their mind. They're probably not going to change my mind, but at the end of the day, I want to listen to them and make sure, number one, that they are heard and that I do understand that perspective. And that's what gives the Ford quote such a resilience to it is simply that knowing the perspective. And, at the end of the day, when we're in St. Paul, in a lot of situations, people only evaluate when we've pushed the red or the green button on the House floor. And when we push those buttons, that's obviously very important. It really puts us on record. What they don't see is some of the things that are going on behind the scenes long before that bill is actually up on the House floor. We've taken it through multiple committees in a lot of situations. The two main political parties in our state will go back into their caucuses and have very specific, intricate discussions of the nuances of the bills and try to create strategies and reasons why the bill is drafted with the language that's drafted with in the first place. And in some of those rooms, they're public. The committee rooms, they're public. In the caucus rooms, that's a discussion within the political parties, and that's not public. But we see movement on bills that takes place in those circumstances. And I always find that the people who are really coming at that with the voice of the people, the perspective of the people that they've been listening to within their home district, that authentic experience of really talking to and having listened to your constituency gives you infinitely more credibility in St. Paul. There are some people that I think get elected into the offices that they serve in. They're very smart and they know a lot of things. But if they haven't really sat down with everybody else in their district and gotten all of those perspectives, when they speak, it gets very focused on something that maybe doesn't seem relevant to the rest of us, and we really try to balance that out.
That makes a lot of sense because the end of that quote, he says, you also have to know your own, right?
Right.
And how do we get our own perspective? Mm-hmm. Well, it's by listening, it's by reading books, it's by doing all those things. In the case of politicians, though, you have to listen.
Right.
And if you don't listen, then you have to manipulate when it comes time to people voting for you or not voting for you, because for 4 years or whatever the different seats are, 6 years and such, that if you didn't listen during that time, now when it comes time to vote, you're going to have to manipulate. right? You're going to have to manipulate people into thinking you did listen or whatever else. But ultimately, if you don't listen, you're not serving the office. You're not serving the people. The people are the government, right? I mean, we are the ones that should be understood the most, rather than, no offense, yourself.
Right. No, and I've told this story in a couple of different audiences. I don't think I've shared it with you, Matt, but one of the things that I serve in a district that covers a lot of territory. I have 14 townships in my legislative district. There are 18 townships in Olmsted County, so I get most of the landmass in the rural area of the county. And of course, all of our townships, they're organized for a reason. They have to, do some of the planning and zoning within their townships. They take care of your township roads and whatnot.
And I live in a township.
Yeah, and so do I. So that perspective it's and city councils are similar to this. Like in Rochester, there's 7 wards in the entire city of Rochester. So there's a lot of people even within a city ward. In some of my townships, there's less than 1,000 people that live in the township. And so the township officers are really who take care of those services for them. And they have monthly meetings. And I always try to bring that role, because I go to these township meetings. I actually go to one township meeting in every one of those 14 at least once per year, even in non-election years. But I specifically go to those meetings, and what I always try to bring the perspective that has taught me, the perspective that has taught me is to know that when a township officer makes a decision on a road, it affects whether or not the neighbor is going to wave at them for the next month.
Sure.
And it literally comes out in the minutes of the meetings, that it will be, or the Johnson's okay with the regrading of the road. And I remember being in the meeting where the township officer says, "Yep, they're great. They're waving at me again." And it's one of those things that it seems like a throwaway observation one could make. But to me, that struck so personal because it matters. Number one, it matters that the township officer listened to his neighbor. But number two, it matters to the township officer that his neighbor is waving at him. And we get so separated sometimes from our elected officials that until you're on that intimate township board level, we don't remember that perspective, and we don't remember how important it is to know that these are people on both sides, the ones that are serving and the ones that are being served. And I'm the serving member, and my constituency, I hope, are the ones that feel they're being served. And we have to keep, it's so hard, especially today in our COVID environment, to sit down and have those discussions with people and know that they're feeling that they're being heard, not feeling that they're being heard, that they actually are being heard. Yeah. And that's, I mentioned the forum I was just at. Sure enough, I got an email, email me at nels@nels.com. And the next night I had a beer with a constituent and got some perspective and feedback on what I had said during the forum, but certainly wanted to take the time. He invited, and I'm happy to sit down with folks. And I didn't even know the topic, whether it was going to be friendly or unfriendly, but we just sat down together, and that's so important. And again, now when I see this person maybe at the grocery store or just driving down the road, I hope he'll wave at me. We disagree on a specific topic, but I hope we can at least know that we are hearing each other and that our perspectives are shared and understood. And
disagreements, people should understand that that's going to be natural. That's going to happen.
Right.
It's not about disagreeing. So many people think that, well, because I disagree with you, now you hate me, or vice versa. And it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and frankly, St. Paul teaches us a lot of lessons on that, because your greatest opponent on one issue, on the next issue, could you be your greatest ally? And you would be shocked at the some of those stories of literally debating against each other on the House floor, and on the next bill, these people are debating on the same side. And so sometimes, again, we focus a lot on the political parties in our state, and maybe that's because the media really focuses on that. But there's a lot of other things that are going on. There's issues with rural members that don't have the strong voice that they once had.
Right.
There's folks in the Iron Range that are trying to always find where are they going to be successful in creating the majorities that they need to pass some of the bills that they need passed in order to, either have manufacturing taking place or just having the funding they need for reestablishing what we're doing in the Iron Range. So, there's just a lot of nuance to that gets lost. And, we just had the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and there's a story, and I can't remember what I think it's Scalia is the other justice. And I don't know if you've heard this story yet or not. There's a story where Scalia is talking to a colleague, and he's got these 24 roses sitting in his office, and he just kind of nods at them and says, "I have to go deliver those to Ruth. It's her birthday today." And the gentleman that is with him is saying, "Well, why would you?" They don't agree on these issues,
right.
Hardly ever.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, they're having this discussion, and Scalia's friend is asking him, "Well, in which divided decision that has been made in the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision, where have those roses paid off for you?" And giving her 24 roses every year on her birthday, when have those paid off for you? And Scalia, and again, I hope it's Scalia, because I hope I'm not misquoting who this was, but he basically says, well, some things are more important than votes.
Yes.
And again, we have to be civil. At the end, there are so many disagreements, and again, we move on to the next day, and we hope every biennium we pass a budget, and it has to balance. That's our state constitution obligates us to balancing our state budget. That doesn't happen on the federal level, of course. That's why we're 27 trillion in debt, I believe, and depending on when you're watching this podcast, that number might go up. So
well, it's going up as we speak.
Right.
So
well, so you're right. The number's going up. So it again, on the state level, we have to do that every 2 years. So the decisions we make, we actually do get to see the outcomes of those every 2 years. And we do see those outcomes in the ballot box, of course, too. The pressure of the voters, whether we've taxed too much or we've provided too few services sometimes. The voters get to see all of that, and we are held accountable every 2 years in the House. That's when we're on the ballots, every 2 years. So lots of fun running perpetually.
The story that you shared reminds me of Reagan, and was it Tip O'Neill that was a big opponent, if I remember correctly? So they were, I'm not going to say this quote correctly, but Reagan had said, we go at each other all day long,
right? But
then 5 o'clock comes around, and then we're having a beer at supper together, and I think I know that's been completely lost. In politics, at least on the federal level, the bigger level. But what reminds me of your story and that of Reagan, that's testimony to what can and should happen in that communication between other sides and things like that. Why are we... I don't know. We can go down a whole rabbit hole, but why is it this side and that side and your side and my side and all these other things when in fact we're a human race? We are in the United States of America. We're not going to always agree, but say, you know what? I'm going to give this one to you because it makes sense. Yeah,
the party alignment can be, it can be a strange and obscure thing, and I believe it's Churchill's quote that says, democracy is the worst form of government that there is until compared to all other forms of government. And, somehow our democracy has developed this two-party system. It's, not constitutionally obligated in any way, but it has just kind of spun into this. We do see, of course, in the state of Minnesota, we have 4 major political parties, which right now, not really locally here, but in the 2nd congressional district, so just to our north, one of the, I don't know if you've heard this in the news, but one of the legalizing of marijuana party candidates has passed away.
No, I hadn't heard that.
So the entire congressional race for the 2nd congressional district is now suspended.
Oh.
Because it's within 79 days of the election. This is I think it's what's dubbed the Wellstone rule, basically. From when Wellstone passed away, they wanted to basically establish, well, if this happens within so many days, we kind of need to reset and let the political party come forward with a new candidate.
Sure.
Well, since last year, two new political parties got major party status in the state of Minnesota based on legitimate results that they got on some of the elections. That
I remember hearing
they
about
were
some
in the
of those
spin
things.
on. Because they have that major party status, they're included. And so because one of those, the one gentleman passed away, that now will be a special election in February of next year. So it's just kind of like, we're really in unprecedented times, and you just kind of scratch your head and say, man, I bring that up in the context of there are more than 2 major political parties in Minnesota right now.
Right.
And it's having a deep and national impact, because now that race, depending on the outcome of our November races, what if that one seat ends up being the tipping point for the majority, determining which major political party has the majority? And we have to wait until February, so that would imply that the Democrats would be in power until February, and then all of a sudden, for the House, but then all of a sudden that special election happens, and if it flips, there's a brand new Speaker of the House in the middle of
right.
I mean, these are kind of, I'm a little bit of a political geek, so you say you haven't followed politics, a ton.
Right.
But me, I've been like, these are the moments that you kind of wait for and could be in awe of the speculation of what these outcomes could be. So,
and when I say an us versus them and you versus me, it's against like each other. I mean, I don't mean like Republicans against Democrats and necessarily, but it is against your idea and my idea, essentially, right? And why aren't ideas valid? I think that what I see, and perhaps what's happening, and you can attest to this locally, but what's happening is I think that the media, and I'm not going to say the news because it's media, right? It's not even news anymore. There's some news, but certainly not on a national level. It's media.
It certainly has changed. I get your.
And so news would be reporting something, right? And now they're trying to sensationalize things and catastrophize that and whatever else. So my idea versus your idea kind of philosophy is what I'm talking about. And why can't we compromise? Do you compromise on a local level? What does that look like?
I think, a lot of ways, when an individual, you kind of have to study or look at an individual bill.
Sure.
And as a bill is introduced, it literally gets drafted and written by our revisor's office in St. Paul, literally gets dropped into what's called the hopper. And everything that we drop in the hopper gets recorded. And the public immediately has access and can see that. And so people can research that. And having that public input then, when things are working well, and when the public is truly involved, we talk about maybe services for someone who's in recovery, for example. Okay? People who are in that industry or have studied that issue, when they see that bill go in the hopper, then they pay attention to it. And so they're looking at it. And so when it's working, when the system's working, the public then reaches out to the bill author, co-authors, anyone who sits on the committee that bill is going to come before. And so when the system's working really well, that public disclosure and information is what's, I think, very important. We find out what the negative consequences can be for some people if we change existing statutes, and people are very willing to share that with us if they see long-term consequences. And so when things are working well, I feel like the legislature is responsive to that. And when you look at the bills online, you will see every time that those bills are amended, either by the author themselves. There'll be engrossments on the bill, is what that language is called. It's just adding and changing the language
based off of influence that they kind of had from constituents.
And when the system is working well, even the minority party is kind of, it's sharpening the knife on the stone of, the challenge of, well, did you think about this? And sometimes in the hearings, those types of questions come off as really confrontational, and we'll even get messages from people in the public who are watching that are saying, why are you so mean about this stuff all of the time? But it's really trying to sharpen those ideas so that they're working better. And if it's a good idea, and if it's the truth, I always believe, and it's going to work well, it should be able to stand up to those questions. And that's again, when the system is working, sometimes the public gives us those types of questions. So then we're asking the bill's author in committee publicly, what about the impacts on this group of individuals?
Sure.
And how is that going to affect the other outcomes? And
it's just like the invention of the wheel. It was really great until rubber came along, right? And made it better.
Right.
You can continue to make things better if you're open to the idea of it.
Right. But again, so when the system's not working, when things get political, that's actually when I get more nervous. When I see one political party basically like, well, we're going to let them take ownership of this because this was their idea and the bill's really poorly written.
Sure.
And it probably won't get passed into law, or it'll get vetoed by the governor because it's such a bad idea. And when I hear those types of discussions, that kind of that cynical attitude towards things, in the back of my mind, I just right away am thinking, well, but what are the outcomes for the people who are in my district or in the state of Minnesota? If that's actually the path that we're going to take, that's not good, because that might mean we have to wait 2 more years before we revisit this problem and hopefully address it with positive solutions, just because we want to put political blame on one party or another. And those discussions are had in St. Paul. Strategically, sometimes people want nothing to do with the solution that's being proposed because they want to pin that outcome on the party that proposed
they want to
solution that's not going to work it.
Yeah.
So I always kind of blend those two things and say, look, this is when the system's working well, we're listening to our constituents, we're doing the right thing, and we're, sometimes they're just bad bills that if we let them pass the way they are, they're going to be catastrophic, like you just said. But we can even improve a bad bill so the impacts are less, or we can benefit as many people as we can, even if it could have been done a little bit better. And because we're in the minority, I have to learn to work with that within those parameters this time. When we were in the majority, it was listening to that feedback from the other political party and allowing yourself the flexibility to go ahead and make those amendments either within the committee and work with people. Sometimes you'd have those discussions and you really would kind of dig into your position, and then you'd actually go back to the person that questioned you during the hearing and try to talk to them and work with them and through that issue together. And suddenly it's my bill I'm the author of the bill, and I amended it myself after the hearing because they were right. And that'll happen. You have to be open to the fact that I always say there's no political party has a monopoly on good ideas.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, we have to listen to each other. And as a rather junior member of the legislature, there are certainly people who have been there longer than me, and some of them do know things that can work or things that won't work. And again, some of that can be cynicism, but I think if you tune in and listen, you can learn a lot from other people.
What do you weigh in on? What I see a lot of is people who are this year they have this idea and they say that this is good and this is what we're going to do, and then in another year or 2 or 4 or whatever, it completely changes because a different party is involved in that. And I think you see where I'm headed here.
Sure. Nominating a Supreme Court justice,
because there, and I did look at this. I was really confused the other day, and so I looked it up. And which is really rare for me because I don't like to look up political things and get involved in it. But I'm like, wait a minute, I'm sure I remember this. So what that is President Obama had come out in 2016 and said, no, this is the duty of the president to nominate. Biden also in that time frame said the same thing. And now today they're saying, both of them are saying, wait a minute, no. Wait till there's the election is done and see who wins. So what do you do in those circumstances on your level? Like, that's pretty significant difference, and that's only 3 years later.
Right.
They're completely 180ing because they're not in power.
Right.
And I don't like the word power either, but that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
And so, but I see that happening on more than just that. But obviously, that's in the spotlight right now.
Yeah, and of course,
what happens then?
I think again on the federal level, I typically don't comment or question, and there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around in DC, not just on this issue sometimes, but on this issue specifically, both sides are really flipping their argument
for sure.
So at the end of the day, elections matter, and majorities do matter, and so that's why. Even looking at this 2nd congressional district race, depending on the shake up and shifts of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, the federal U.S. House of Representatives, what if it comes down to 1 seat? Mm-hmm. And all of the money that will go into that one race in our state, just to our north, it'd be remarkable.
Yeah.
But we on the state level, we do see that, and it's sometimes even more alarming because there will literally be a bill that's written by a member of one political party that doesn't pass, and 2 years later, someone from the other political party will pick that same bill up and maybe make a couple tweaks and changes to it, and then it does pass. And so sometimes in Minnesota, that's because, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's about prioritizing where our dollars are spent. So if there's, if it's just a policy issue, that can just be a change of opinion or, just a change of what voters have expressed to us. The issue of legalizing marijuana, for example, for me, I don't, when I go door knocking or I'm talking to just regular constituents on a daily basis, it isn't the top of mind most important issue for most people in my district.
Right.
They might have an opinion on it one way or another, but when we're sitting down and talking, it's not the first thing they bring up. So, to me, that's like one of those issues where, again, we see the public has moved. We see the public has shifted. Same thing with Sunday liquor sales. That might be a better example. In this state, we had old blue laws. That were referred to blue laws specifically on the books, kind of to justify having, worship on Sundays and nobody working on Sundays. And blue laws were literally in state statute. Car dealers still are. It's like one of the very few blue laws that's still on the books is the car. You cannot sell a car on Sundays.
Sure.
You can do an oil change.
Can you buy one?
You can't. So it's funny. It is a nuanced thing. The dealerships can't be open. I think you can pull off a private sale, and I've also heard that a vehicle could be delivered on a Sunday as long as the paperwork was handled some other time.
Saturday, Monday.
Usually you'd have the paperwork handled beforehand because the dealership's not going to hand over the keys to somebody that hasn't paid for the car.
Sure.
But, there's some nuances there. And again, so those blue laws, though, the public really started to inform the elected officials. And that shifted over time, and it was funny because that was not an issue that was partisan. Both political parties kind of had some, municipalities weren't big fans of legalizing Sunday liquor sales because they had their municipal liquor stores.
Right.
And they didn't want to staff it an extra day and potentially lose profit. They also were afraid if they didn't open on Sundays, then they'd lose to the big box stores. And it was a very nuanced, discombobulated discussion. And as a caucus, at least from my perspective, we were basically told, go ahead and vote your district, which again, we all basically always do. But this was one where they're like, we're not really weighing in on winners and losers on this one.
Sure.
You guys have people to answer to and have at it. So the public really started becoming more vocal on that. And honestly, I think that bill had been introduced 7 or 8 times in the Minnesota State House of Representatives, and it would get hearings some years, and some years it wouldn't even get a hearing. And in my first 2 terms, it was discussed in my first term, very heavily debated, and then never made it to the House floor. And then in my second term, it got to the House floor and passed. So we that's why we have Sunday liquor sales. But the public informs us on some of the stuff, and their minds changed a little bit on some of the stuff.
I totally get that, but when you have something that is that big, it's either you have the character to stand on that or not, right? Like having the opinion of we're gonna nominate a justice, but your party can't, and it's both ways. I get that, but that's a pretty big thing,
right?
You should never flip-flop on something that big if it serves your purpose or not. In my opinion. That's my opinion.
And I get where you're coming from. I think ultimately the perspective from both the standpoint of the elected official and the people who elect them, you could have different philosophies of how you govern in that nuanced way, because you could be we're a democratic republic, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you could take that perspective as an elected official and literally go into your district all the time on every single issue and just ask hundreds of people, well, what do you think? How do you think I should vote on all of these issues? And then when the vote comes to the House floor, you're going to make up your mind based on what you've heard from those hundreds of people. Or the people could elect you because they know who you are and they know your values and your convictions, and they trust that you will make the best decision for them. And then you are standing by your philosophy. And it's where that nuance, I think, really happens is sometimes the most popular thing isn't the right thing. And we need our elected officials sometimes to have the courage to stand up and say, yeah, this is going to cost me a lot of votes in November, but it's the best thing for the people in my district. It's the best thing for the people in my state, ultimately in the United States and in the world. Sometimes is, again, where that vision and that global perspective can be for some of our elected officials. And I think that's important to keep in mind, that philosophy, because there's a story of former state representative Dave Bishop was a guy from the city of Rochester, and he's passed away. And, this day and age, we get emails by the dozens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just some days as I'm reading emails, more are coming in than what I'm able to read through.
Sure.
And depending on the day and depending on the issues that are at hand. Back then, Representative Dave Bishop was notorious for reading all his mail, and he had gotten letters from constituents, and he stands up on the House floor and he's holding up 7 letters and saying, the people have spoken. And that's his speech, because 7 people had taken the time to write a letter. Well, you're representing, back then it might have been closer to 30 or 35,000 people in a legislative district. Now we're pushing, I think, 40,000. I probably have those numbers or the math way off on that. But the point is, 7 people speaking for 40,000, doesn't
And who are the
necessarily
people
mean
that
you
speak?
should. Right. I mean,
Yeah,
they might have had a coffee meeting together and just all 7 of them decided,
Yeah.
we're going to write our representative a letter.
Exactly.
And that's good. But again, I think where you gain credibility as an elected official is to constantly be having those conversations and to be in multiple various audiences so that, like your Henry Ford quote came from earlier, you have all of those perspectives. And when you have that perspective, at least for me, it provides me with so much more confidence in knowing that I am, in fact, I'm doing, every time I push the red or green button, I'm doing the best that I can for the people in my district. And I think I'm getting it right. I know not everybody's going to agree with every red and green button I push. But again, we have to have that confidence that we've done the right thing. And I think you only gain that by having talked to so many people. And that's what, I guess, what I always try to provide.
Yeah. No, you definitely, I agree. And I think you do a great job of that. What I think is so crucial, though, is when you're talking about the Constitution, the Constitution doesn't say you shouldn't have liquor sales on a Sunday.
Right.
I mean, it's been a long time since I've read the Constitution, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
Well, at one
there.
point they said no liquor could be sold. That was
Right.
one of the amendments. But yeah.
Right. But I think that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we upholding the Constitution as a whole? Second Amendment, First Amendment, obviously, are the ones that are always being, politicized, unfortunately, and they never should be. But in my opinion, and so I think that's really the point of it is this right for the Constitution first? Does this make sense with that, rather than flip-flopping in whether or not you're in power and you get to make the decision or not?
Right.
Clearly, the Democratic Party doesn't want Trump to make a decision. Clearly, the Republican Party, they don't want Nancy Pelosi to make a decision. And I think that's where it just gets lost for me. They're going to make decisions.
Right.
So what can we do to help that along? And I'm just saying that as a perspective and a point of view, not as a question. Why is it that you have, I'm trying to do the math real quick. Are we 8 months into the COVID thing now? So we're just 7 months of lockdown.
I think we're
since
close
lockdown?
to 7 now. Yeah,
but we kind of heard about it back,
right, sure.
And so, but the lockdown is 7-ish. So when we have something like that in our own state of Minnesota, how does our governor? How is it that our Constitution is written in such a way that our governor can make those decisions sole-handedly for that long of a time?
Sure. Well, the
and I'm not saying that to attack the governor.
I know
might
exactly
do that later.
I know exactly where you're coming from with the question.
That's a huge concern for me, no matter what political party is in control.
Right.
You're talking about the governor of a state having that kind of authority for that long is really confusing to me.
Yeah,
one person.
Yeah, and I think you have to go back to the actual, it's in statute, these emergency powers.
Yep.
And when you read the emergency powers, it's essentially put in place there for any time that the local jurisdictions are overwrought with a catastrophe of some kind.
Yeah.
Typically, we're talking about floods or tornadoes or, those types of weather events or a giant fire or something like that. And usually that's a regionalized issue also. So the governor has that ability, and so does the president, of course, too, to come in and declare an emergency.
Yep.
And the reason that is, it's like...
and that makes sense.
Let's take my home county of Whatwan County, very small towns. So like even the fire departments or the police departments, you're talking about, if you took the whole county, you maybe have 100 people in the whole county that are trained in those types of things, and something catastrophic comes in and wipes out a couple of towns, and their resources are spread so thin. So the governor comes. So that's actually where this authority comes from, is those statutes. And when this started, we were seeing the reports coming out of other countries. Italy, for example, we were hearing horror stories of people that weren't weren't even admitted into the hospital. They literally had to decide who was going to get an ICU bed and who was going to die. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that happen on the other side of the world. And they're telling us it's coming here too.
Yeah.
And we need to plan for it. We need to prepare for it. And we need to flatten the curve, right? That was what the discussion was all about back then. So that's why the emergency powers were given to the governor at that time.
Yeah.
Now,
I'll sign off on that.
Right. We're all in agreement that that's the right thing to do,
yes,
and those
I'll
should
sign
be
off
there.
on that completely.
Where a lot of discussions will probably be had moving forward, seeing this from a perspective, looking forward, I think both political parties can acknowledge that this has gone on longer than it had to, and I think longer than it should.
I'll also sign off on that.
But the important part of it, I think, from my perspective, because I am a member of the House of Representatives, and people tell me, well, why aren't you doing something? Or other people will tell me, well, why aren't you just working with the governor? And for the one audience that says, well, why aren't you doing something? Every 30 days, because the governor has these emergency powers, every 30 days we're brought up to St. Paul, or we're calling in a special session. And that's required within these rules. But both the House and the Senate have to vote affirmatively to remove his powers.
Yes.
And that's, I think, where people are talking about, that's probably one of the things we need to change. We need to probably vote affirmatively to continue to grant him his powers. If we have to vote affirmatively to give him the powers in the first place, it probably makes sense that we should both agree. And that way the governor hasn't gone too far or overreached or been going on unchecked for too long. And I think that's where a lot of people are. The folks on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats that I serve with, they oftentimes are referencing, well, every other state has emergency powers except for one. I can't remember which state doesn't have them right now. But every other state, the other 48, are all in the same situation. Well, what's unique about that is in those other states, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, they control the governorship and the House and the Senate. So it's really not like anyone's going to argue with the governor, or they are working together. Right now, the governor doesn't have to listen to Republicans because he has the power.
Sure.
So for those folks who say, well, why can't I work with the governor? I'm trying to.
Yeah.
But I have no checks or balances.
Yeah.
We are given information just like the public is, and we are not allowed to ask questions in committees right now. We don't have any hearings. We don't have the commissioners at our fingertips because they're supposed to be doing their jobs, which I get that. But there are some tough questions that I think the governor and his commissioners should be being asked. And as an elected official, some of my questions should be being answered, and they're not. And I think that's where we're having the biggest conflict right now is we are totally out of the loop. And every 30 days we're asked to go up or make our call into the body and to vote affirmatively to renew his powers. In the Senate, one Democrat has voted with the Republican majority, and it always passes in the Senate, and this time with one Democrat, in fact. And in the House, we had all Republicans vote for it, and I think we had 5 Democrats, but that still falls short of what we need to actually remove the governor's powers. And people also kind of misrepresent when we say we want to end the emergency powers. They think that we're just gonna that's it.
Yeah,
we're all going to pretend that COVID isn't even in existence anymore.
Right,
and the reality is we want to essentially have the legislature part of that decision-making process, analyze what we're doing, see what we're doing right, and continue doing those things, see what we're doing wrong and change those things. And, again, ultimately for the state of Minnesota, we're losing revenue at an alarming rate. And that sounds so heartless for someone to say that this is about that money. But we're talking about maybe a $5 billion deficit for the state of Minnesota moving forward.
But here's what's more heartless, and this is absolutely sickening to me. There are now numbers and proof that suicides are going up in our state. There's numbers that alcoholism and drug abuse is going up in our state, which also includes deaths of overdose are going up in our state. You talk about heartless. That is not being even discussed.
Those are
on that level.
Those are the front end, like trackable the results of where we've put our state and the position we've put her in. But minus
the monetary side of it.
Well, but the monetary side of it is important because
it is. I'm not saying it's not.
If we can't spend those $5 billion, Matt.
But if you can't look at that part of it even at all, if you're so focused on this COVID thing right here and holding on to your power, and you can't look at the human side of it, money aside, and I want to let you say what you want to say, but you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Here? People think that this is about money when you talk about that. I want to make it super clear that I know you're not. That's not what you're right. Where your head's at. But what people don't do and aren't doing, and people I have talked to that are scared to death of this COVID thing, and I don't even know why. They don't know why. They don't have an answer why. And I asked them the question, well, what about suicides? They're going up. What about the depression rate that we can see clinically skyrocketing? What about the overdoses that are happening? What about alcoholism that's going up? What about all those things? And they just don't want to even talk about it.
Right.
That's heartless. And that comes back to our governor. And that concludes part one of the conversation with Nels Pierson III. We're going to go ahead and put up part two right away, so make sure that you go check that out. Just probably easier for you to view and listen in a couple of different parts. So flip over, check out part two.